Hey, Fred. Fred.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, both panelists and attendees. We are just waiting for our main discussant from ATAF, who will be joining us, and also one last discussant, the Executive Director from TGNA, Alvin. We expect to be starting shortly, so if you could bear with us just 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Alvin, yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, please. What about breaks? Promoted him too. So. So Alvin, we're just giving it a few minutes and then we can go ahead. Yeah,
Brian, can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Sorry.
Why do you read as Nelly? That's weird.
I was panicking. I used the link Nelly shared.
Okay, I'm just trying to promote Nelly because you know your name reads as Nelly. I was wondering. Please.
Is there anything I can do to change that? Nelly shared a
Change
link
it
to
for you,
everyone.
no worries.
Thank you.
You can speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Ah, good. Sorry, I thought the link was the same for everyone, so I was trying to.
I know. Okay, it's okay. It's been a tough day.
I thought
Nelly,
I was
we are
tech
all ready
savvy. I thought I was really confident about my tech savvy, but looks like a few things.
So I think maybe just give it a few minutes and see whether a few more guys will join. Then Nelly, I think the floor is yours now to go ahead.
Sure, no problem. Okay. Thank you. I don't see Dr. Ezra. I think we have.
Yeah, we're just waiting for him as well.
Okay. I think we have too many Nellies. It may have been the cause of that. Perhaps I think Dr. Ezra is one Nelly. You could, Brian, you could help and change the name. I think there is another one, but I'm trying to figure out who it is.
You shared.
I shared my link.
They're all joining us, Nelly.
The good thing is that they're all here, so at least
they can rename themselves, but because I don't know who's who. So I don't know how it's. They can. All you need to do is click on more, and you'll see rename. It's the third from the bottom after put on hold, so you can rename yourself.
Maybe Alvin could help to tell us who is who.
I'm Nelly.
Yes. So I see, I think this is Dr. Ezra, the one on my left on the screen, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, I thought so. I thought so. You're welcome. I think we can start off now. I think it's more or less, I think, the last session of the day, if I'm not mistaken. And I think there's been information overload. Probably people are dreaming about IFFs this whole week. So, so you're all welcome to this session. The session this afternoon, evening for some, or morning for others, is on IFFs in the extractive sector, current status, what policies and practices require reforms, and what are the institutional governance frameworks needed for effective implementation at all levels. And we have a distinguished panel, and very happy that you had time. I will not attempt to pronounce your second name, but I think you'll introduce yourself. From ATAF. And then we have Mr. Alvin Motioma, Executive Director, TGNA, that's the Tax Justice Network Africa. And then Ms. Faith Mazani, Commissioner General, Zimbabwe Revenue Authority. You're all welcome this afternoon. And I know this is an issue that's really pertinent, especially in a season like this, and with all the challenges we've faced in generating revenue for countries, and particularly also the challenges we're facing in the extractive sector in many of our resource-rich countries. Dr. Ezra will be presenting a paper on the same issue, which will generate the discussion for this afternoon. There is a Q&A tab that you all have at the center of your screen, so feel free to share your questions, your comments there. And then we'll get the panel to speak to that, and maybe other participants as well can join in the discussion. So Dr. Ezra, I think possibly about 15 minutes would be good for that presentation. I think you should be able to share your screen, Brian, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes, they can.
Yes, so you're free to share the PowerPoint presentation so that our participants and audience can view it. Otherwise, please take it away, Dr. Ezra. Go ahead and present, and then we'll get into the discussion. If you can unmute, you're still on mute.
Okay, I hope you are now hearing me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you also for inviting me to present in this August workshop. Let me try to share, because now I don't know whether, you see, with this technology, I had shared my document, but I can't control it now. So can you just allow me to unshare it so that I will share it again?
Okay, you could do that again. As you sort out that, I just thought I should. I think I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Nelly Businje. I work with the Publisher Chipe International Secretariat as the Senior Regional Coordinator for Eastern Southern Africa. And so I'm very happy to join you for this meeting. As we wait for Dr. Ezra to sort out the presentation, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, where you are, where you're listening in from, what your areas of interest are, and some of the expectations from this panel and this session. Dr. Ezra, has it worked? Dr. Ezra, if you're trying to speak, you're on mute, but otherwise, maybe you could start us off, maybe if possible.
Okay, I was saying, are you now able to see the presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
So you haven't yet shared your screen yet.
Oh, okay, sorry. What about now?
Yeah,
yes,
we can see
it. We can see it.
Okay. Thank you very much, and apologies for that inconvenience. So because of time, I think I'll quickly rush. This presentation is divided into, I've just, here I'm sharing with you the outline of the presentation. So it will just have the introduction, and then we'll talk about the manifestation of illicit financial flows in the extractives. Then we talk about stages of illicit financial flows, and then the status, we will talk about the general status of IFFs and also the status of the IFFs in the petroleum sector. And then we'll move also to look at the mining sector. And then we'll present some policy options and administrative considerations. So that's how the paper will be structured. And I'll try to be fast because of time, since I've been allotted 15 minutes. So right away, I start with the introduction. So basically, when talking about illicit financial flows, we are talking of the involvement of the transfer of financial resources and through illegal activities. That could be through corruption, that could be through criminal activities, or efforts aimed at sheltering wealth from the tax administrations. And I think one key important factor is that Africa is a depository of vast mineral resources. However, it is suffering from the resources, from the natural resource case, because even its development is hampered through revenue loss due to illicit financial flows. If we look at the contemporary situation, the COVID-19 pandemic has even worsened the situation, as most of the illicit exploitation of and trade in the extractives went unchecked due to national lockdowns. So I think the COVID-19 pandemic even worsened the situation that we have regarding these illicit financial flows. Then I move to the manifestation of illicit financial flows. So here we see how illicit financial flows manifest themselves. It could be through abusive transfer pricing. And we know that multinational companies, they employ very complex structures in order to shift profits to low tax jurisdiction from high tax jurisdiction. The other way, in the way that the manifestation of the IFFs is that of through trade mispricing, where we are talking about the MNEs falsifying the quality, the price, or the quantity of the traded goods, often through over-invoicing of imports, or it could even through under-invoicing of exports. The other way would be misinvoicing, and it's almost related to the trade mispricing, but here we're saying it is common in the inter-group transactions, and it is perpetrated via royalties and management fees. There is also the issue of unequal contracts, where we see that the contracts could be vague or could be secret contracts relating to resource extraction, and at the end of the day, it will disadvantage the jurisdiction concerned. One other way would be through thin capitalization. And here we are saying MNEs, they will borrow from the low tax affiliates rather than raising capital through shares. So if you go through the paper, it will give you a detailed description of each aspect. But because of time, I'm trying to move with speed so that I am able to present within the given or allocated time. And so we move now to the stages of illicit financial flows. So I want us to realize that at each stage, the illicit financial flows can occur right from the exploration stage through to the exportation of the mineral. So what do we mean? For example, at the exploration stage, which is the first stage, you would see that there is usually the problem of falsification of declarations of expenses incurred. And there could be even bribery to get permits from officials who have authority to issue those permits. So that's how we see the illicit financial flows manifesting in the exploration stage. Why do they falsify the declarations of expenses incurred? So they can even balloon the expenses so that they will be able to pay less taxes. So that's how normally they do, what normally they do in the exploration stage. And as I said, the issue of bribery is also very common in many countries. And you will see then that there's a lot of, there's no transparency at this stage. So the next stage would be the contract negotiations. Again, you'll see that there will be a lack of transparency. When contracts are negotiated, most of the time, there is this issue that MNEs would lobby for very generous tax incentives. And in some cases, the tax authorities are not involved in the deliberations. So you see they can be given some incentives. At the same time, they could even go to the extent of getting customized arrangements such as stabilization clauses. So these stabilization clauses would make them not to pay tax for quite a long time, long period of time. And you see, as I have said, that the other challenge at this stage also would be the lack of coordination between government ministries and departments. So you would see that, like I said, the Minister of Finance, the tax authority may not be taking a very leading role in these contract negotiations. And so it could maybe the Minister of Mines who takes a leading role, and sometimes the incentives that are given to the MNEs would end up now affecting the revenue base of the tax administrations. And at the production and processing stage, there is also lack of transparency regarding the production and labor costs. So because the idea is to pay as little tax as possible, they would maybe declare very huge labor costs and very huge production costs. And so there is always no transparency because the idea is to pay little tax or to make sure that the companies do not pay as adequate revenue as they are supposed to be paying to the government. In some cases, they can even do that through camouflaging or for production levels through using artisanal miners and SMEs. That is mainly for also under declaration purposes. And when we look at assaying and selling and even the exportation stage, there's still some challenge. You see that the element of illicit financial flows continue to affect our jurisdictions, firstly through falsification of quantity and quality. So for example, let's talk about the platinum group of minerals. We all understand that in the platinum, there are several minerals within that ore. It could be iridium, it could be palladium, it could be gold. So sometimes it depends now on what level of the ore is being exported, what level of value addition is taking place. So sometimes you see they are not even clear. They just declare platinum, but at the end of the day, they don't even make declarations of the other accompanying minerals within that ore. So those are some of the challenges that jurisdiction experience. And also there is the use of the multinational enterprise branches in tax havens to set non-arm's length prices. I think we all know about transfer pricing. So these are the stages that we find out in the mining, especially of minerals. And we are saying in all these stages, the element of illicit financial flows is always there. So I proceed now to the general status of illicit financial flows in Africa. So here I've just researched and come up with figures that will make us maybe have a debate, since it is a policy debate paper. These figures are just to make us think. They might not be very correct, but these are figures which come from sources that we accept very valid sources that we can depend on. So as we go through, first I'm gonna talk about just the general status of the illicit financial flows in Africa. So between according to the Global Financial Integrity, between 1970 and 2008, around USD 854 billion was lost through illicit financial flows. And according to Oxfam, about 56% of the illicit financial flows, they leave Africa, or they have left Africa between 2000 and 2010. And it was mainly from the extractives. So 50% of the 56% of all illicit financial flows coming from the extractives, and that is for the period 2000 up to 2010. According to the European Commission, mining and extractive companies are responsible for 65% of tax fraud in Africa. And we all understand the situation that we are living in, the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the World Bank, they are saying the pandemic will place about 43 million Africans into extreme poverty. So that calls us to really be serious about this issue of illicit financial flows and to coming up with the ways of safeguarding our revenue so that it will not again be expatriated through these ways that the multinational companies are using. There is also this point that illicit financial flows, they contribute to an estimated loss of around 50 billion annually. And I think if you look at all these figures, these are huge figures. These are figures which should make us think and think outside the box. So for us to be able to collect or to protect the revenue. Now I'll go to the specific sector and talk about the status of the illicit financial flows. I'll start with the oil sector, and then I'll go to the mining sector. So if you look at I've just drawn some few case studies again, so that we probe debate around this discussion. If we look at these figures and how much Africa is losing, I think we then have to understand and see how best we can protect our revenue. So for example, Algeria, we are told that Algeria lost around 25.7 billion from 1970 to 2008. This was lost through illicit financial flows in the petroleum industry. And this accounted for 20.1% of the illicit financial flows in oil on the African continent. So we are saying around 20% of all illicit financial flows in oil, they were lost through Algeria. And the figure 25.7 billion is quite a huge figure. Again, we look at Egypt. We are told that Egypt lost around USD 31.3 billion from 1970 to 2015. And we are told also that the illicit financial flows, if you put them as a percentage of GDP, they are estimated to be like 27.3%. So these are figures that should make us think and think outside the box. How best should we protect our revenue? And Nigeria is, we are told that it tops the list of countries that were victims to illicit financial flows between 1970 to 2008. As they lost almost 217 billion due to illicit financial flows in the oil industry. The same applies for Angola. Angola has lost about 4 billion in oil revenues. And we are saying this was not reported in national accounts in only 1 year, 2002. So again, these figures are so worrisome. They should make us think innovatively, think innovative ways of how to safeguard our revenue. Let's now move to the mining sector. We are told that Tanzania, their annual tax loss owing to trade misinvoicing averaged like 1.87 billion. That's per annum. And we actually have a company in Tanzania which was involved in gold mining, and it had a tax loss of about $84 billion between 1998 and 2017. For those who would want to follow the case is also even open. You can just Google it and you see the name of the company. So just for anonymity reasons, we couldn't put the name of the company, but just one company in one sector declaring a tax loss of 84 billion from the period 1998 to 2017 is so worrisome. It should also make us think and think outside the box. We are told that South Africa was ranked 7th place globally among the top 10 sources economies for illicit financials in 2007. So the cumulative illicit financial flows exceeded around 209 million from 2004 to 2013. And we're told that the cumulative trade misinvoicing outflows from 1995 to 2006 were around 167.9 million USD. And also the gold that was under-declared through exports was like 78 billion from 2000 to 2014. And this comprised like 67% of total gold exports. Let's look at Zambia. Zambia is losing almost 10% of GDP annually due to corporate tax avoidance practices. And this accounts for 65% of Africa's illicit financial flows, of which 80% is through copper. So one mineral, 80% of revenue is lost through illicit financial flows. And we know copper is one of the main key minerals in Zambia. Again, in Zambia, about 8.8 billion was illegally flowed out from Zambia between 2001 and 2010. And we are told that the revenue that was lost through thin capitalization is twice the annual government revenue of 4.3 billion for the year 2011. Let's look at Zimbabwe, also what studies have said about Zimbabwe. We are told that in the last 3 decades, Zimbabwe has lost around 12 billion due to illicit financial flows. And it loses like over 50 million worth of gold monthly due to smuggling. And the country has also lost about 2.85 billion through IFFs from the year 2009 to 2013. So for the studies that we used, you just go to the paper. But here I just say, because of time, let us just give the figures. And you go to if you want to go through the actual studies, you get them from the paper that we have shared with you also. So Zimbabwe is also about 3 billion has been externalized between 2015 and 2017. And we also know that about 150 million was lost monthly in 2015 due to these illicit financial flows. So I've just given a few countries, but already the picture shows that it's not a good picture. For all the case studies that we have presented here, both for the cases in the mining sector and for the cases in the petroleum sector, it is just showing that the case is not good. So what are among some of the quick policy options that we could consider in order to close these loopholes, or in order to maybe fight these illicit financial flows? So the main aspect that we looked at from a policy perspective is to have reforms in legislation, reforms in the legal environment. And so here we are suggesting that, for example, taxpayer in the area of taxpayer information confidentiality, we need to have reforms. We should actually change our laws regarding that issue. And also with regard to the inter-agency cooperation frameworks, to ensure that streamlining, adaptability, and averting of duplicative activities. So illicit financial flows can only be successfully fought if, as jurisdictions, we are able to share information, because they take advantage of one jurisdiction and then use another jurisdiction, maybe a high-tax jurisdiction, through transfer pricing to move their funds or their wealth into low-tax jurisdiction. So that's why there is need for information exchange. And the other point would be, we need to enact clear and understandable laws that criminalize activities such as mispricing. These activities should be criminalized. So if we have legislation reforms that criminalize such activities, I think that would also help in reducing the illicit financial flows. The other point would be to enhance the representative liability framework That is to pursue actors civilly in order to enable recoupment of funds. So if we find that this company is the one that has been involved in illicit financial flows, how do we recoup the funds? How do we take them? Maybe they have already been shipped to another jurisdiction. Do we have adequate laws to protect these countries? Do we have good collaborations among countries so that we are able to deal with these challenges? Another way would be to maybe introduce the mining royalties regime for those countries maybe that have no royalty regime in place, or even to consider reviewing the rates of royalties. Because unlike corporate income tax royalties, you can it's a quick win. You can get the income, at least you can get the tax or the revenue on time. And also, in line with the first point that we talked about, legal reforms, we are just saying we need to change laws. And here specifically, we are talking about legislative changes to meet transfer pricing risks. And you know, one of the areas where our jurisdiction have lost revenue was through the treaties that we have entered with many countries. So we need to think about renegotiating those treaties. We need to think about changing some of the articles in those treaties so that we protect revenue, so that we protect our jurisdiction from treaty abuse. So those are some of the policy considerations. Now I go to administrative considerations. So like I said, when I was alluding to the policy, here is what tax administrations or various administration actors could do. We could consider running aggressive compliance campaigns in the areas of company registration, that is for domestic and foreign registration companies operating within their jurisdiction. There is also this issue that I have already alluded to of intra-African collaborations. As I said, illicit financial flows, they would need us to exchange information. There's already something that the IFF agreement has started on mutual assistance in tax matters, which we call AMATAM, and which create a multilateral framework for the exchange of information on tax matters. It can play a very critical role in the success of audits conducted on multinational companies because there will be sharing of information among tax jurisdictions. Another way would be to rechannel administrative capacities. Here we are talking about re-evaluating the manner in which resources, that is financial as well as human resources, are allocated across the broad spectrum of government. We should move away from the traditional government silos, that silo approach, and we should move towards a matrix-styled approach as a more effective allocation of existing resources. Yeah, so because of time, I think I can stop here. I can just conclude and say the challenge of illicit financial flows has been upon us, and now that we have other challenges like the COVID-19 pandemic, we really need to think deeply about how we can deter these challenges, how we can fight, how we can combat it. But it calls for mutual cooperation, it calls for collaborations among tax administrations, and it calls for equipping both our human resources in tax administrations, in the various ministries, and also having enough financial resources so that we are able to fight this enemy, which we call illicit financial flows. Having said that, it remains for me to thank you for your attention, and I hand over now to the chairman. Thank you to the chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Ezra, for a very insightful presentation. Quite a number of things that you've talked about, some of the losses that we are facing, in the sector, both petroleum and mining, and some of the stages of IFFs, and looking at, the different stages that where IFFs are manifested, from exploration to production and processing. Right now, I would invite Alvin to come in here. We've been talking about IFFs for quite a long time. This is the 8th PAC. And as civil society organizations, we've mobilized, we have created, collaborations here and there, and got into spaces that naturally, a few years ago were not part of. And so as you come in to sort of give your voice to this discussion, I'm reflecting of where we have leverage as civil society organizations, as movements and networks. Are we going to get it right? Are we going to be able to build on, some of the work that we've done to really address or push for policy reforms and practice change to address these issues? Alvin, you're welcome. I'll give you about almost 10 minutes to chip in. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Thank you very much, Nelly. I hope I'll keep between time. There's really a lot to unpack. And Ezra, I think that your paper is really very, very insightful. I had the opportunity also to skim through the foundational paper, The Future of Taxation in the Extractive Sector, that forms the foundation of the paper you presented. Really, really insightful, and has got quite some ideas that are worth unpacking. So I'll try really to summarize it and provide some of my own thoughts on this. Firstly, I think it's important to recognize that as a result of the privatization and the liberalization we saw in the early 90s, led by the international financial institutions, the World Bank and others, under the so-called Washington's consensus, we saw a wave of privatization in the mining industry, moving away from the state-owned enterprises in countries like Zambia and others. And unlike the oil sector, you find today that the mining industry is really dominated by private sector enterprise. And this is basically a recognition that maybe at this stage, taxation provides the most effective way of sharing benefits in the mining sector. This shift, of course, away from state-owned enterprises and the reliance on taxation basically means that the kind of tax policies that countries have put in place at the national level, but also more importantly, the global financial architecture on taxation plays a central role, a deciding factor if countries are going to benefit from the natural resources. And what we see, unfortunately, is that many African countries are facing quite significant challenges when it comes to the tax policy. Some of these challenges are domestic, while others are of international nature. And I think that Ezra did speak to some of these, and I'll try to basically also kind of provide some insights in some of those. One area I think that Ezra also did speak to is the area of tax incentives. I think that really you can't discuss the extractive sector in Africa, the mining industry, even the oil sector and gas, without looking at the loopholes that the tax incentive systems have created and significantly undermined the ability of countries to capture revenues from the mining industry. This has really resulted to companies across the continent operating year in, year out without paying a dime to the fiscus due to the kind of tax holidays and tax incentive regime that have been provided. And I think we will not move ahead in this debate if we don't revisit these tax incentives. And here, in my opinion, really the solutions lie in twofold. One, there's really need for countries to put in place tax expenditure policies as part of the reforms that Ezra was talking about. And this tax, tax expenditure policies will basically bring more transparency into the system, be able to show the public what actually companies are gaining or what countries are losing. Because right now, even when you look at some of the figures that Ezra was providing in terms of the figures that countries are losing, or the continent is losing, or developing countries are losing, this is really a tip of the iceberg because of the opacity that is that characterize this system, because many countries don't have tax expenditure policies, it's really difficult to know the left hand to know what the right hand is doing. And these tax incentives are basically very, very opaque. And I feel that tax expenditure policies will significantly contribute to bringing in some light into the system and being able to tabularize what incentives are being provided, what's the cost of those tax incentives, what's the benefit of those tax incentives, and be able to make informed policy decisions. The second, Nelly, is again to be able to tackle the area of tax incentives. I think that regional collaboration is key, it's instrumental. Again, tax incentives have resulted to a race to the bottom. Countries being pitted against each other, providing all these incentives. If you don't come to me, I'll go to your neighbor. And having ways at the sub-regional level, at the EAC level, ECOWAS, SADC, for countries to come together and develop regional standards in corporate tax, the corporate income tax, in the VAT, I think will contribute significantly to addressing the harmful tax incentive that has resulted to a race to the bottom. I'm speaking really fast because of the little time you have given me. The second area, Nelly, and I think Ezra did also allude to that, is the work around the double tax agreement. I mean, either through exposés we have seen in the Panama Papers or the Mauritius leaks. Double tax agreement, again, many countries have signed double tax agreement that go back in as far as the 60s, negotiating double tax agreement that significantly provided avenue for aggressive tax planning or aggressive tax avoidance, particularly tax havens, double tax agreement that are being signed with secret jurisdiction. As a matter of fact, if you might know, Senegal, many of the investment into the mining sector in Senegal, for example, are channeled through Mauritius. We saw the same thing in Uganda, with Mauritius playing a very central role in the oil exploration in Uganda. And therefore, really, the need to revisit the double tax, the existing double treaty networks, particularly treaty networks that have been signed with the treaty agreements that have been signed with tax havens, will be critical. And reviewing those and ensuring that they are sealing the loopholes, and solutions are on the table. Really, if you look at the ETAF tax model, the ETAF DTA model, it provides an African adapted solution that can be able to inform the review of some of these double tax agreement. And additional to that, introducing tax policies, DTA policies at the national level. This many countries don't have. We have been pushing this in Kenya through, as you know, our litigation process that we have been doing since 2012, pushing that the Kenyan government introduces a DTA policy that informs negotiations. You are going into negotiations blindfolded. You don't have a red line. These are the things. This is how far we are able to go in the kind of the treaties that they are signing. These, I think, is critical. The third point, Nelly, and I'm moving. I'll have one more point to say before you you close my mic. Is the area of abuse of transfer pricing. Again, studies after studies showing that transfer pricing or abuse of transfer pricing regulations are the major source of profit shifting and base erosion, particularly in the extractive sector. And the solutions in the short term, of course, have been that we need to increase our capacity, we need to invest in human resources, as Ezra was saying, establishing transfer pricing units at the national level to be able to cap the challenge of abuse of transfer pricing regulations. But this is the short-term solutions. In the long term, I think that we need to recognize that these companies, we stop handling them as independent units. These are consolidated companies, and the long-term solution goes towards a unitary taxation. And I think as part of the BEPS process, there is this effort of establishing a minimum taxation and moving towards taxing this company through unitary taxation or formula apportionment, as it were. I think this will be in the long term the only solution that is required. And how do we get there? This, of course, requires a reform at the global level in terms of governance, ensuring that we are moving away from the OECD-led process to a UN-led process, establishing a UN tax body where these kind of negotiations, either in the unitary taxation I've mentioned others, addressing the global governance system is instrumental and key in the long term if we are to ensure that developing countries are gaining from the natural resources that they need. And this requires that African countries also speak in one voice, united either through the solutions that are being provided through bodies such as ETAF or the African Union coming together as policymakers and speaking in one voice at the the global table organized under the United Nations, which I think has been one of the issues that TGNA and others have been pushing. A UN tax convention, a reform of the global tax system to ensure that countries, as developing countries and rich countries, are speaking around the table in terms of the global reforms. Nelly, I'll stop there because of time, and we can go into question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alvin. We'll have another chance for you to chip in as we get the discussion underway. Thank you for those insightful points, and especially around, strengthening some of the work that we are, pushing for in reviewing all these policy reforms, treaties, agreements, and the like, and utilizing the collaborations between different actors. I'm going to invite Ms. Faith, who is Ms. Faith Mazani, who is the Commissioner General of Zimbabwe Revenue Authority. And of course, you come in from an administrative point of view, and some of the issues that Dr. Ezra did point out, and some of the things that need to change, speak to some of the work that as administrators, I'm sure you're very familiar with. So I'd like you to chip in into this discussion. Some of you share, of course, sharing some of the experiences and possibly also speaking to the paper as well, and some of the issues that have been raised. I'll also give you 5 minutes for now as we get into the discussion.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelly. I just wanted to add maybe the perspective from Zimbabwean perspective. Like you said, looking at the administration and the issues that we contend with. I won't go into the background, which I think Dr. Ezra has clearly articulated. We are looking at the implementation of the African mining vision, providing for credible integration approach in administering mineral resources for economic development. I think one thing that I wanted to just highlight is the need for us to also pay attention to the conversations that have been on the ground. And particularly, I've tried to look at the 2009 report on the high-level panel on illicit financial flows, because at times we find as administrations, there's been all these discussions which have not permeated into our administrative platforms. But I think it gives guidance to what we should be focusing on and influencing the policy makers to assist us, particularly looking at the challenges that we face in administering revenues from the mining sector. So let me just emphasize that in the context of the COVID pandemic, we found ourselves with a situation where those challenges that we are facing were magnified by the lockdowns, where we could not then effectively monitor the taxation and putting systems to curb the illicit financial flows. But one thing that we observed as revenue administrations is a giving in to pressures by governments, pressures for concessions, and these would then open room for rent-seeking behaviors. And this is something that we find in the sector as other sectors, that there are concessions. And I think Brian has also touched on that issue. But before I go into the policies, let me just emphasize the importance of the mining sector, the extractive industry for Zimbabwe, by just giving the contribution. Dr. Ezra has, I think, given us the country perspectives at the global level. But I just wanted to share the fact that the mining sector and the mining and quarrying sector for Zimbabwean revenue is contributing 23%. And that's quite substantial. That's about a quarter of the revenue, of the total revenue. But going into that 23%, which is the highest, followed by the financial sector at 17% and manufacturing sector at 15%. So we see the importance of the mining sector or the extractive industry for an economy like Zimbabwe, which is depending to a great extent on domestic resource mobilization due to all the challenges that we have with sanctions. And of that revenue, we find that royalties contribute 3.47% to the total revenue, gross revenue, and it also contributes 16% to the mining sector revenue. So I think it emphasizes a point that Dr. Ezra mentioned, that African countries should look at ways of improving the revenue mobilization from the mining sector because of our rich endowments in natural resources. In terms of domestic tax itself, mining royalties actually contribute 6%. Let me go now very quickly to some of the policy reforms, and these speak to the points that Dr. Ezra mentioned in his presentation and in the paper. We are looking at reviewing of the tax incentive framework. Like I said, this is an area where the governments have faced a lot of pressure. But what we have done, and I was happy to hear Brian recommending the issue of putting in place the tax expenditure facilities to ensure that we have transparency, one, but also to monitor what that revenue is doing and ensure that we recover what other benefits are anticipated, whether it's generation of employment or capital investment, so that we then do a cost-benefit analysis instead of just giving away. And for Zimbabwe, our tax expenditures are quite huge, and we report on them on a monthly basis, but also defining and improving the tax, the base for taxation of royalties. What we have is a situation where we charge our royalties on the gross value of the invoice. And this has presented some challenges because of the issue that we are exporting unbeneficiated minerals, and then companies want to then claim the expenses, which gives room to transfer pricing and base erosion, which are big challenges and used for IFFs. The policy changes that we have had, and as Zimbabwe, we have done some work in putting in place transfer pricing legislation and supporting regulations. And we did this with the support of ITF. We are also receiving assistance in terms of building capacity, undertaking joint and spontaneous investigations at inter-country level involving illicit transactions, impact analysis on concessions and other policy changes, improving intergovernment agents' cooperation in fighting illicit schemes, and tightening controls and improve systems to curb smuggling and other illicit transactions. Here we are looking into investing in drones. We already have scanners and CCTV to ensure that we capacitate the administration. At the regional and international level, Dr. Ezra also mentioned and Brian mentioned the issue of DTAs, but we're looking at reviewing and crafting mutual agreements on exchange of information and at continental and international levels. We're also trying to push for quick accession and domestication of regional and international protocols. We find these are agreed and negotiated at the continental level, but they are not actually implemented because there is no legislation for it. Very quickly, other administrative provisions or practices that we have: anti-corruption agencies collaborating. We have ZIMRA collaborating with our Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, our Financial Intelligence Unit, and the National Prosecution Authority on enforcement activities. And these actually include implementation of the asset forfeiture legislation and money laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act. Platforms for reporting IFFs cases between us and ZAC. We have the whistleblower platform and the intelligence liaison platforms. We are hosting the RILO, Regional Intelligence Organization, under the WCO regional structures. Our central bank is instituting a robust reporting systems by banks to enable timely detection and reporting of IFFs. And towards the end, just highlighting some institutional and governance frameworks, full implementation of the high-level panel on recommendations centering on BEPS and transfer pricing, and regional bodies to facilitate capacity building. We are working with IFF and the OECD, putting in place platforms for automatic exchange of tax information, enhancing data infrastructure. We have a project that we're putting in place for data warehousing, but also supported by exchange of information and interfacing of our systems. I think that's basically what I can say in the short time that you gave me. Thank you, Nelly.
Thank you, Faith. That was a very key contribution from you as well. And I think you've put a lot of emphasis on some of the mechanisms you've put in place to curb, the illicit financial flows, especially in the context within which we're discussing. But I think you also emphasize the collaborations and sort of capacity building efforts that you put in place through, ATAF and others, and also working with government agencies to deal with some of the challenges that you're facing. I think the other thing that I kind of noticed, maybe we'll talk about it in the sort of plenary discussion. We haven't really touched on the political will, the challenges I think that governments and even administrators, I guess, face with having to reform policy. And I've seen that, in the work that we've done over the years when it comes to tax reforms. There's always a lot of resistance politically on how that is going to change things and chase away investors or things of that kind. So there's always that, trying to balance. We have a couple of questions, comments in the Q&A. I know the panelists can view some of those, but I'm also asking the attendees, the participants, please, you can use the Q&A tab to ask a question and or provide a comment. I see here a question. I think this is Alvin, because I think it's a question related to Kenya. What is the role of judiciary in preventing IFFs, for example, in the Kenya context? Does it have the capacity to prosecute cases arising from IFF-related cases that lead to loss of revenue? And I think also Dr. Ezra could contribute to that. So I understand the Q&A tab is not working anymore. So I think we'll use that chat function to send questions. There is also one in combating transfer of prices. How can nations move from the OECD-led process to the UN-led process? And how assured are we that UN-led process can be effective? And I think the panelists can see that. So I'm sure all the three speakers can speak to that, given your experience. Then how effective are the data warehousing when the players are the referees? I think that question is probably to Ms. Faith. So I will ask Dr. Ezra, some of you, based on some of the issues that Alvin and Ms. Faith have talked about, if there is anything you'd like to add, but also to speak to any of the questions that have been raised and the comments that have been made. Dr. Ezra?
Thank you so much. I think for now, I can allow maybe Alvin and the others to come in.
All right. Okay. Then. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Alvin, I think you can respond to the question. Or I think judiciary, the one that's being asked about judiciary. Sorry. Alvin, we can't hear if you're speaking. You're still on mute.
Yes. Sometimes we end up speaking to ourselves and forget that you are on mute.
Sorry about
with the Zoom calls. Yes, the judiciary. That's a very interesting question. I think that the fight against IFF, really, many a times we have ended focusing a lot on the executive and ignoring other bodies within the kind of governance system that are critical. And this is also not by accident, because what we note that actually in Africa, in many African countries, the executive controls the direction of fiscal policy, of tax policy specifically, and these other bodies are playing a very subsidiary role and a very minimal role. And what we have been pushing as TGNA is really what needs to be done to strengthen the involvement of these other bodies. And this is not just the judiciary, it's also parliament. As you know, we have been conducting capacity building for parliamentarians. There's the Africa, the APNIF, the African Parliamentary Network on Illicit Financial Flows and Tax, all aimed at strengthening oversight institutions which play a critical role in terms of the direction of tax policy. As you know, many a times the executive can be captured. Institutions such as the executive arm, it can be captured by vested interest, by political interest, it can be captured by private sector lobbyists, as we know, and this in many cases has been the reason why you have very skewed fiscal policies, even when you know, sometimes in Kenya, for example, the discussions we're having about why would a government that knows how harmful the Mauritius DTA is still go ahead and want to sign it, knowing very well that they are getting even warnings from Revenue Authority, the Kenya Revenue Authority, about the risks of the Mauritius DTA and other DTAs that the country is signing. And it is really re-emphasizes the need of strengthening the capacity of other oversight bodies, including the judiciary and the legislature. Concretely, the question you asked, I think that the Kenyan judiciary has been very open. We, as you might know, as those non-Kenyans in the room, we have a new constitution since 2010 and a very, very strong, which has a very strong emphasis on public participation and consultations in all processes. And this really provided for us here in Kenya an opportunity to pursue litigation and really getting a favorable result from that was also as a result of some level of independency of the judiciary. Having said that, I think that it's also important to underscore that technical issues on taxation is not the area for judiciary, and I think that going forward there might be need to really look at this area, invest in this area, because as you know, the tax litigation has also provided an incentive. Companies really abusing laws, knowing very well that they will get away with it because of the low capacity that is in many of the judiciaries across the African countries, not just in Kenya. So really, the need to invest in legislative arm, the need to invest in technical capacity building of the judiciary is a very, very important aspect of the fight to curb illicit financial flows from Africa. On the question of the OECD versus the UN, I think that, yes, of course, there are many arguments why multilateralism is not working as it should. And of course, with the rise of nationalism across the world, there has been an effort to shrink down the impact, the role that multilateralism can play. But in essence, we can't get away with it. Global solutions, global problems require global solutions, and global solutions can only be found within a multilateral system. We don't have an alternative to that. So I think the question really we should be asking is not if we should be moving away towards the UN. The question is, how do we ensure that the UN system that we are creating, that the UN tax body that will be created, has been given sufficient teeth in terms of resources, in terms of financing, to be able to execute that mandate. That is the only alternative. I think, considering the circumstances and what we have seen in terms of the role that the OECD has played in terms of the agenda setting, the BEPS process, how exclusive that role has been, how some of the solutions that they have provided are going to actually exacerbate illicit financial flows from the continent, calls even more the need to strengthen the calls for a UN tax body and reform the global governance system in the area of taxation and illicit financial flows.
Thank you, Alvin. I'll ask Faith to come in here. There are two questions for you. How effective are the data warehousing when the players are the referees? Then I think there's also a question from Briggs to speak to any specific cases of public revenues recovered or public revenues lost prevented, public revenue loss prevented from the from those that you have, from the issues that you highlighted earlier. You're on mute, Faith.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Let me start with the first one on data warehousing. I did make reference to the data warehousing project that we are putting in place. We are building our system so that we can have quick access to information. And this is being done through the MOUs that we are signing. We have already signed an MOU with our ZimStats for statistics, but we are also in the process. We've signed an MOU with FIU and the central bank. We are looking at expanding this, these platforms to other stakeholders that can give us, like our mining and minerals authority, where we can get the information and then be able to respond very quickly. I did mention the issue of the central bank ensuring that they actually monitor and provide the information. And this is why we are working on signing the MOUs so that we can exchange the information very quickly. We are already working with some of those institutions, like the Financial Intelligence Unit. But having received that information into our data warehouse, we then analyze it and get the intelligence from there, and that informs our investigations. So I'm not very sure whether I understand the issue of the players and referees, but this is just capacitating the administration to be able to respond very quickly to information that comes in from other institutions, and working together with all those institutions that have got an interest or have access to either domestic or international information. So I think that's my response. But let me also touch on the issue of our MOU with the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and the National Prosecuting Authority. And we are working with these institutions, particularly in the enforcement of the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act. We have had some successes in recovering or seizing some assets, and we are expanding on our cooperation and collaboration, particularly with the NPA, which has got the prosecuting powers, so that we recover some of these assets or proceeds of crime. So it's something that we are hoping that when it is fully operational, we will be able to recover even internationally lost resources, working together with the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. We are a member of the anti-corruption strategy that has just been launched by the president. So these are some of the structures, institutional structures that we are putting in place as a country to try and address some of the challenges. Sorry, can you refresh my mind, Nelly, on the question that you read? I don't have it on the screen.
Yes.
What was it about?
Any specific cases of public revenues recovered
Okay.
or public loss prevented? Yeah.
Okay. What we have is we have had a number of cases, particularly with our royalties, where we've had some of them not declaring, and we have taken cases to court. For confidentiality, I can't give any of those cases, but we have won some cases, but we have also lost cases because of some of the agreements or arrangements that are within agreed outside the fiscal structures or fiscal laws. But there's been efforts to harmonize, and this is something that we think we, as an administration, we are trying to play a role in bringing to the attention of both the government structures, and also an advisory role to our ministry on some of the loopholes that are there. And I think Brian touched on it as well as Dr. Ezra. So in terms of our investigations, actually what we have done in terms of building our capacity, besides the domestic taxes audit function, we have our revenue assurance division, which is actually a full division under a commissioner, who are responsible for investigating some of these issues. And they have a number of cases. They are the ones who are receiving the intelligence. They're the ones who are doing the investigations. They're the ones who are doing the prosecution. And we are in the process currently of capacitating this division under the commissioner to ensure that we act very swiftly. And it also works very closely with our loss control, which has got linkages with both the judiciary and our other security agents, where we need to go and do some investigations where we have identified some losses. So I can't be specific, but yes, we do have cases where we have recovered. We've taken cases to court. We've lost some, yes, but we are doing some work in terms of strengthening our investigation work. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. There are about 2 questions that we have, and they don't seem to have a specific, they're not directed to someone specific, but maybe I'll ask Dr. Ezra to chip in since you haven't yet spoken. There is one from Anna Sophie. Is there a connection between sanctions and IFFs, in the sense that sanctions are both sparking more IFFs and a hindrance to being able to fight IFFs? And then there is also a question from Irene of Wonji. What is the status of developing a coordinated African approach to tax negotiations at sub-regional and AU level to ensure that Africa negotiates as a group in external processes? Dr. Ezra, if you're able to respond to those, I can ask also Alvin to chip in there as well. Yes, Dr. Ezra, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you to my colleagues for responding on the earlier questions. As you know, let me just maybe comment on the first questions regarding the transfer pricing choice between UN and OECD. As you know, as ATAF, we collaborate with both the UN and the OECD, but at the same time, we look forward to bringing a model that is suitable for us as Africans. So even regarding the transfer pricing issues, we have developed our model transfer pricing guidelines as ATAF, because we customize our work to the needs of our members. So I think I just wanted people to have that understanding. And I think that partly answers the second question, to say, though we collaborate with the OECD here and there, though we collaborate with the UN, but as ATAF, our mandate is also to find solutions for our membership and to customize those solutions to our needs. So for example, you would see, for example, if we are talking in the area of tax treaties, it now depends on whether the countries are source-based or residence-based, because the OECD model would favor more of the residence-based type of taxation. But for us, most of the countries that we have maybe are source-based. So we would then, in that regard, I think the UN model would best address the requirements, but as ATAF, we have even went further to come up with our model tax treaty, which now provides assistance or guideline or information to our members as we customize it according to the needs and the priorities of our members. Okay, so regarding the issue of sanctions, and the connection with illicit financial flows, it could be a controversial issue, but I think there is a relationship, There are studies that have been done, for example, in Zimbabwe, which countries we have heard the Commissioner General alluding the fact that the country is under sanctions. There are studies that have been done, which have also shown that a lot of revenue has been lost through sanctions, and not only through that, but because when sanctions are imposed, there is no free movement of funds. There are a lot of restrictions in funds. Even the banking system is no longer as normal as it used to be. So people try to find ways of busting all those arrangements. And in some cases, that's why you see, yes, there will be some form of illicit financial flows because of the restrictions that have been put in place by sanctions. But I think my colleagues could also come in and add more on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ezra. Perhaps you could also, Faith, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I wanted to just add to what Dr. Ezra has indicated, just to add that the modus operandi that we have found, which is motivated by sanctions, is that because investors are unable to bring back the revenue from their exports of minerals, they are trying to find other jurisdictions where they can channel their products or minerals, and then that money then never finds its way back. So even if if they are not going to be able to bring in if they are not able to bring in the revenue, they then have to find a jurisdiction where they can then be able to recover. And what you then find is this is done outside the normal procedures where we want to bring in the foreign currency, but documentation can't then go indicating that these are minerals from Zimbabwe. And some of it is done, which then causes transfer pricing issues where, because we do have the beneficiation of minerals being done in third countries, that then becomes the origin, and issues of the origin of the minerals is then distorted. So they are, yes, and we have some statistics which are pointing to that, which unfortunately I had not prepared, but yes, they are very clear and direct results of sanctions which are actually leading to illicit financial flows. And it's something that I think is an area that needs attention as well for those for the continent to address, particularly for administrations that are under sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. Maybe Alvin, if you don't mind, you could speak to the question by Irene, and I can also let Dr. Ezra chip in if there is anything you'd like to add on the status of developing a coordinated African approach to tax negotiations at sub-region and AU level.
Well, actually, that is already happening. When you look, for example, in the area of tax incentives, we have the East Africa Community, SADC, ECOWAS, they are all in one way or the other involved in some kind of harmonizing their tax systems at the regional level. Of course, each region, each sub-region with a different pace. There are a number of challenges in Kenya here, for example, with smaller countries feeling that the harmonization effort is not working into their advantage. So those efforts are happening in the area of tax incentives. We know, of course, for instance, that in the EAC region, there is an EAC double tax agreement that has been in the works for over 4 years now, 4 years, I think. And the reason it has not come into effect is because one country is yet to ratify it. Otherwise, once Tanzania ratifies that treaty, then we'll have an East African DTA. And once that is signed as an East Africa region, then of course it sets the kind of framework for the countries the individual countries when they are negotiating other treaties and ensuring that whichever treaty they are negotiating does not undermine the sub-regional treaty that they have signed. So I think at the sub-regional, there are those efforts, and there's more that needs to be done. I think, Irene, the point is that if you look in the area of trade, the African countries have recognized the importance of trade beyond national borders, which resulted to ACFTA being a continental framework to facilitate regional trade, with all its critics, of course, with all its weaknesses that we have pointed out in the past. I think it's time that we recognize tax as a similar issue as trade and ensure that we are working in the long term, starting sub-regionally in terms of establishing sub-regional tax codes, tax frameworks at the sub-regional level, be it covering exchange of information, covering tax incentives, covering double tax agreements, beneficial ownership, all these kind of different areas, and then consolidating that to a regional continental framework. And I think the high-level panel report is a good start in that, for example, in terms of doing analysis at continental level of the challenges of illicit financial flows and providing continental solutions. What there needs to be done is establishing continental instruments, policy frameworks, institutions, but we are on the path there. The consortium on illicit financial flows is one of those, I think. So there are different examples of the continent trying to work together and really exemplary. We don't have similar examples. If you look at other regions, we don't have a similar example as an HLP, for example, for Asia or for Latin America. So in that case, I think that we are on the right path, but we need to hasten that pace and ensure that we are moving towards implementing some of these really great recommendations that are being made, but also establishing the necessary institutional and legal frameworks for implementation, both at the sub-regional level and at the continental level.
Thank you, Alvin. We are running out of time, so I'm more or less going to start concluding this session. There is just one last comment. I think the person either signed in as me, so I'm not sure who it is that has made the comment, but I think it's additional information in a bid to develop a coordinated African approach to global tax negotiation.
There's one comment in French. Unfortunately, I can't read French. I don't know if any of the colleagues. The one from
I did. Oh yeah. I didn't see that. I don't know if any of our colleagues can help there. But this last comment in the chat box, I think says that the AU finance ministers will be meeting early December 2020, to jointly consider the issues regarding the global debate on taxing rights. Oh, that's Mary. Sorry. I think, yeah, Mary must have received my link. Thank you, Mary, for that. I don't know if there's anyone who can interpret the question in French, and I'm also not able to copy and paste it. Others that have used Google Translate, but if that Brian can do that.
We interpreters.
Oh, so is there someone who can help us? Alternatively, Brian, you can put it in Google Translate, and then
we have interpreters. They can read it out for us in English.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. If you can go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to disable interpretation for a bit so that I can let Moses speak, and then.
Okay. All right. Okay.
To me in private chat, I'm not seeing the question. I will read it for you in English.
Moses, you can go ahead now, please.
Yes, please. Read it for me. I'm not seeing it. Where is it?
Okay, so I think he says that if you can copy and paste it to the chat.
Yes, you can send it in my chat so that I see it, because I'm not able to see it.
Okay. Okay, while Brian is helping us with that.
Enquanto o Brian está nos ajudar com isso.
I can hear another interpretation. Okay. So I think let us come to the end. I'm just going to give Brian 1 minute to sort out that. I saw a hand up. I think, Irene, that was your question in the chat, because your hand was up earlier. If there are any other questions, as Brian is getting that question done, I'll just ask our speakers to... Yes? Say that again.
Okay, we have one of my colleagues here will read it out for you.
Okay,
So,
please go ahead.
She's called Eva. Yeah.
All right.
In the system of African governance, governments is over it's actually like in a privileged position as compared to the other two powers. The executive as compared to the judiciary and the legislative. And I am always worried about how Africa can tackle the illicit financial flows as that when both the other two powers, namely the judiciary and the legislative, are not how do you say that? are like eaten by the executive. I wouldn't know how to say that.
Dominated by the executive.
Yeah. So it sounds more like a comment.
That the path is still long for to convince that the dirigents the role of those two powers. Well, that since the judiciary and the legislative are not so strong as the executive power, the writer is worried that on how Africa can juggle IFFs, since those two powers are not as strong as the executive one. So he believes that the path toward the path is still long to convince those dirigents of those two other powers of their power.
Okay.
Nelly, if I can pick that very briefly.
Yes.
Yes, I think that sometimes, and this is lessons we have learned from Kenya, is that we have really been, in that case, really successful in terms of trying to shift those powers. The case of DTA is an example. Until 2 years ago, treaties were being negotiated and signed without the involvement of the executive, without the involvement of parliament, even when the laws are very clear. Parliament was being bypassed. And through our litigation process, right now, even although there is still significant lack of capacity at the legislature, the executive is now in its effort to honor the demands from the court, based on the court ruling of the Kenya-Mauritius DTA. Now Parliament is actively involved. Actually, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, we were in Parliament. A week ago, actually, we were in Parliament presenting the Parliamentary Finance Committee on the same, and it was really surprising in terms of sometimes they are not even aware of their own powers. So trying to use constitutional provisions can be an avenue of trying to strengthen the involvement of the of Parliament and the judiciary.
Right, thank you, Alvin. I think you make a very key point there, and maybe it also comes down to how much civil society can influence some of those reforms, because I remember in Uganda, we really made a case for ratification of agreements, treaties at the level of parliament, and I don't think parliamentarians know that clause or reform was actually put in one of the laws in about a year or two ago. And so they actually have a mandate to look at those international treaties before they are signed off and debate them. So that's quite a bit of work for us as civil society. As we end, I'm just going to ask our speakers. Alvin, I don't know if that was your last word, but I'll give you 1 minute after Faith and Dr. Ezra have given their last word and final remark, and then we will close. Dr. Ezra, please go ahead, and then we'll have Faith and Alvin.
Okay, thank you very much. I think from all that we have seen and from all that we have heard, we've seen also that the issue of corruption is a key issue that is to be addressed. and the corruption both in the high echelons and in the low powers. So Madam Mazan was talking about the initiatives that the Zimbabwe Revenue Authorities has made regarding this issue, where they've joined with the Anti-Corruption Commission. I think this is a learning point for other jurisdictions. But at the same time, you remember I alluded to the fact that some of the corruption is not even nothing to do with the tax or officials, but it's also among the those who have the powers even to grant the concessions, to grant the contract and the like. So I think this requires a coordinated approach, and this required strong systems that would fight corruption for it to go. The other issue, I think, to deal with the illicit financial flows, as I already alluded to, I think it's not upon individual jurisdictions to be able to deal with it, because it happens across various jurisdictions. So there's need for a coordinated approach. There's need for a unitary approach among different jurisdictions to come up and speak with one voice against this ill in our society. So I think that could be another way we can be able to deal with it. Thank you so much. Because of time, I think I can stop here.
Thank you, Ezra. Faith?
Thank you, Nelly. Maybe let me start by just emphasizing the point that Dr. Ezra has just indicated just now, to emphasize the need for a collaborative effort, not just locally with the institutions that are responsible, but also regionally. As a continent, we need to work together, exchange of information, especially as revenue administrations. I did mention the RILO. It gives us information on some of the intelligence that is coming, and to act on this using the protocols that have been signed at the regional level. But just to also emphasize what you said, Nelly, to say that we're not touched on the issue of political will. I think this is very, very important. Some of the things that we as a revenue administrations are doing because of the voices that we are hearing from even the Presidium talking about corruption and putting the institutions. We signed our MOU because we see the support that they are getting politically, and we are riding on that. And of course, there would be some other challenges with corruption in Africa, you know how it is. But I also wanted to emphasize something that as African countries we are facing. The issue of small miners is opening up the countries to a lot of illicit financial flows because there are no controls. We have the artisanal mines that are mushrooming all over, and they've been taken advantage of by the big business people. You see the big cars in those areas where there's panning, gold panning and whatever. And they are given minimal returns or revenues from their proceeds. But what Zimbabwe is trying to do is to then identify agencies through which those can sell their produce. And we are looking at then identifying these for the purposes of then taxing that collected revenue, otherwise would have lost it. And I thought I would share on this. It's something that we are still working on, but also to emphasize the issue of transparency. I think it's Alvin. Sorry, Alvin, I've been calling you Brian, but Alvin has been has been mentioning that the issue of transparency, the tax expenditures, and analyzing what we are losing or giving in from the mining sectors, because that's where a lot of concessions are coming. So I think these are areas that we would want as administrations to focus on but especially the need for implementation of institutional governance frameworks, the full implementation of the high-level panel on recommendations, centering mainly on BEPS and transfer pricing, where national, regional, and multilateral agencies like IFF to provide capacity building, but also as institutions to look at how best we can share information, authorities to establish transfer pricing and criminal investigation units to timely and effectively tackle the issues of IFFs. We are, as I said, through our revenue assurance division, trying to set these up. I know other countries in West Africa have got these units to specifically attract the skills that will then deal with the issues that are, because the administration in itself doesn't have that capacity. And lastly, just to go through some of the very key administrative issues that we need to pay particular attention to, robust registration data requirements, and ensuring that we build infrastructure for collecting data so that we can then analyze and get intelligence so, that informs our investigations and then leading to prosecution and fighting the corruption. Thank you very much, Nelly.
Thank you, Faith. Alvin, as you give your concluding remarks, you'll see Irene saying that CSOs in the tax justice sector could learn from the approach of CSOs in trade in mobilizing engagement that was done in 2000 to 2005. That the efforts between ActionAid, CEATINI, Oxfam, Third World Network, and many others in sort of bringing that collaboration and addressing some of these issues. So Alvin, please go ahead as you give your final remark.
Yes, I fully agree with Irene that there's quite a number of lessons you could learn from previous struggles for economic justice, be it in the trade arena, be it in the debt arena, in terms of better organizing, in terms of consolidating our work. And this is already starting, as you might know. There's the Stop the Bleeding campaign that brings together over 6 Pan-African organizations and a number of national level initiatives that are started mobilizing around the issues of curbing illicit financial flows and building up on the work of the high level panel. So yes, I fully agree that there are lessons you could learn there and borrow from success of previous economic justice struggles. Lastly, Nelly, and I'll try to be very brief, I think that what is really emerging out of this conversation is that the solutions to curbing illicit financial flows are not only national, they are not only African, they are global challenges, there are regional challenges at the African level, and they are national. And there are things we can be able to do at the different levels. The question of political will must be manufactured. And I think this is where the work of civil society that Irene is speaking to becomes critical in terms of putting pressure on our policymakers, institutions where there is state capture, putting pressure and using all kinds of advocacy strategies and tactics to ensure that we are working together at the national level, we are consolidating our efforts at the regional level, but also engaging in global level processes in terms of the work, for example, that Irene is leading at the FACTI panel. I'm happy she'll be speaking about that tomorrow. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done at these different levels, and forums such as the Pan-Africa Conference try to create an environment where you can be able to have those kind of conversations at the different levels.
Thank you, Alvin. Thank you to all our panelists, our speakers. It has been a very informative and very insightful discussion that we've had this evening. I think it kind of ends that day's program today. And we have a couple of sessions tomorrow as well. So good thing is that no one will be rushing to the airports as we normally do at the park. But hopefully the attendees and participants and members within our region can attend tomorrow's the last day of the Pan-Africa Conference. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to the team at TGNA and Trust Africa for supporting that meeting and the session, and to all the attendees, those who contributed as well to the discussion, every participant, thank you from wherever you are. We wish you a very good evening. Thank you to Dr. Ezra, to Faith, Alvin, and everybody else, and to the interpreters as well. Thank you very much. If you can turn on our videos and say bye. I don't know how long we'll do this, but have a nice evening. Hopefully next year we'll meet in person.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Nelly. Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dr. Ezra, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Crash program, waita Jaco. Yeah. Oh, all right. Let me send it through.